I just saw A Quiet Place day one and I have some thoughts, so let's get into it. Okay, so this movie I didn't really have any expectations for. As you already know, it's a prequel to A Quiet Place, both 1 and 2. 1 was a movie that I really enjoyed and it has stuck with me over the years. 2, I remember really enjoying at the time, but I don't really think about it all that often. I just kind of go, yeah, it's a good movie, and then move on. So I wasn't really expecting much from this, especially since we're moving on to a new set of characters in a different scenario, a different director. I kind of thought, okay, this is where this franchise is going to just fall apart. It should have stayed in the self-contained little story and just let it be that. It going to New York and being what was advertised to be a bigger story felt like the wrong direction for these movies. However, that wasn't really the case because A Quiet Place Day 1 I think was poorly marketed because the film actually feels in essence very similar to the other two films. Sure, we're in a bigger landscape with it being in New York, but this is still a very character-focused film with a lot of heart at the center of it all. This was directed by Michael Sarnowski, who, if you haven't seen anything he's done before, he previously directed Pig, which was a film starring Nicolas Cage. And that was a movie that a lot of people thought was going to be very violent, but it was actually really gentle. And he kind of employs that into A Quiet Place Day 1. This is a very vulnerable movie at points. The way that it is directed and certain moments are shot feel very intimate and very gentle. And that really works for A Quiet Place because that was kind of what John Krasinski was doing with the first two movies, with it having all of this heart and focusing on family. In this movie, yes, it's not a family. It is two protagonists, Sam played by Lupita Nyong'o and Eric played by Joseph Quinn. Their dynamic shares a lot of that gentle nature and finding real connection in this set of circumstances where really one sound is all it takes for someone to just get ripped away and destroyed by these creatures. This movie does a lot of good things. There was a little bit left to be desired, I think, in terms of talking more about these creatures. Sure, we do get a little bit more context. I do think we see them a lot more frequently than what we do in A Quiet Place 1 for sure. And you do see a little bit about how they communicate and things of that nature, but it doesn't really give you too much of an explanation apart from what you kind of see in the trailers. So I was thinking that we could have seen a little bit more there, even though we do get a lot of scenes filled with tension with these creatures, as we always do. You know, when it gets quiet, it's just so tense and you can feel everyone in the theater on the edge of their seat, just waiting for the ball to drop, waiting for that jump scare. And that is both a really good and bad thing with these movies because we're into a third movie now with A Quiet Place, and it has kind of done the same thing with its jump scares in all three. So there were moments in this movie where I kind of felt like it was being a little bit of a one-trick pony with its jump scares. But for the most part, they were filled with tension, and there was just a real great use of utilizing cinematography and shadows to make everything more menacing. We well and truly know what these creatures look like now. We know what their weaknesses are. We know so much about them in terms of who they are and how they operate from the first two movies. And usually in horror movies, when you reveal the monster, after a while it becomes kind of tiresome and you don't really get that same fear factor. Michael Sarnowski is still able to pull that off with this movie, so that is a really good achievement on his part. There's one great sequence where there's all of this dust surrounding our protagonists and you just don't know where they could be because once again we're in this large landscape now in New York City and it's infested with these creatures. You could get one at any moment, at any time, and that adds a layer of tension to this film. Going into the performances and these characters, I think they were really great. Lupita Nyong'o has always been great in pretty much everything that she does. You know, what she did in movies like 12 Years a Slave, Us, Little Monsters, which is a highly underrated movie that you should check out. She just brings such a great performance in all of her roles, and she does that again here. Her character is kind of unlikable in the beginning of this movie, and very purposefully so. I don't think it's going to work for everyone, but it is a very purposeful choice because it kind of goes against that as the film progresses in really interesting ways without inherently just telling you what is going on with this character. She kind of doesn't have this desire to really live or anything like that. And as the film progresses, as she's in these tense scenarios, you can see, well, she does actually have that inkling to survive and still live. And that's a great juxtaposition from what you see in the beginning and what this character is telling us as an audience. I just think that's a really great decision and really smart direction. Eric, played by Joseph Quinn, is a very vulnerable character who you might think is kind of annoying at points. You really gravitate towards him as the film progresses, and once again, Michael Sarnoski does a great job of making us connect with this character, and Joseph Quinn sells us this character with his great performance. Their bond in this movie is very interesting, and I quite liked the way that it progresses and moves forward within this universe. It really just fits right at home with A Quiet Place. I also have to mention the cat too. There is a cat in this, and it is one of the better animal performances that you will see this year. The cat was absolutely incredible. It can be an absolute pain in the ass in this movie, but you still can't help but feel charmed by this cat, how cute it is, and some of the things it does. There's also just really great moments of direction. There's just great pieces of imagery that prod at your imagination with the sound, and I just thought that was a really nice addition to this movie. For example, no spoilers, but there is a shot of a basketball court, and they're just walking past it, and obviously they're in this world now where they have to be dead silent, but when you see this image of a basketball court, all I could imagine was the sound of people running across the court and bouncing a basketball. And then it cuts to a chessboard right after, and all I could imagine was someone moving the pieces, clicking that onto a chessboard. I just thought that was just a really, really great use and piece of direction. The way that it prods at your imagination, I thought was just brilliant. It kind of gives the viewer something to just think about without really telling you what to think about. I just think that was just so brilliant and so subtle, and it's just a moment in this movie that just won't get enough credit, I believe, but should, because once again, just so brilliant in what it was doing there. Now, in terms of negatives, I've already mentioned the missed opportunity with the aliens and really diving into them a lot more than what we could have. But I also think this does have a very predictable flow to it. The characters reach a certain point in this movie, and when they hit that point in this movie, I knew exactly what was going to happen to them, and it practically went that way. So this movie doesn't really do anything all that surprising, and because we're in the third of these movies now, I am really starting to think that there is going to be some fatigue that hits A Quiet Place. I really don't want to see these movies get dragged through the mud with just multiple releases and it being some kind of big epic franchise, because you will get diminishing returns with this series at some point. It is already starting to feel a little bit of a fatigue because we're doing the same thing with the scares and there is some repetitiveness there. I do believe the next movie needs to wrap this thing up, and that will be very satisfying because all of these movies have been quality. There hasn't been a bad one. They've all been good to varying degrees. And I think if we push this to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 films, we're going to get some bad ones in the mix. So I do highly recommend that they wrap this thing up before it runs out of steam, because it is going to head in that direction. There are also some shortcomings with this being a prequel. For some characters that appear, you kind of know where they're going to end up around the end of this movie. Just certain little elements like that almost add to the predictable nature of this movie. Overall, A Quiet Place Day One was a pretty great movie. I really, really enjoyed my time with it, and I do recommend it to you, especially if you love the other A Quiet Place movies. This just fits right at home with this series of films. Are there some flaws? Sure, but for the most part, this has a lot of a heart, excellent direction, great use of sound, great performances that you can easily connect with. I just think this movie is a great time at the theaters to bring quite a few people. I think if you have a respectful, good crowd there, I think you can get a lot from this movie in terms of that communal experience at the theater. It really is something special. What more is there to say? As a score, I'm going to give A Quiet Place Day 1 a 4 out of 5. I just think it was a great time. And those are my thoughts towards A Quiet Place Day 1. Let me know what you think about this movie in the comments below. I'd love to have that conversation with you guys. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.